Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 46. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish you'd been given earlier in our careers. I'm your host, John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, joined by my co-host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
Hey, John, I'm doing great. We are VMware solution engineers with backgrounds in IT operations. We hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to virtual enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
Great, Nick. Hey, today's the first part of an interview we had with Keiran Shelden, which was a bit of an odd throwback for us, wasn't it?
It definitely was. As we discussed in the very early days of the podcast, before we even released, in the days where we were practicing, we had found Keiran's blog, labeled it as interesting, and it was something we wanted to speak to him about in the future, but we just didn't get around to it yet.
Yeah, I'm glad we were able to circle back and actually talk to him directly about it. I think we were originally not even planning to talk to him. We were just kind of planning to talk to each other about it. So this was much, much better. His article's pretty relevant to one of the major IT topics that we're seeing out there, which is burnout.
And just so listeners don't burn out, this is another two-parter. So in part one, we talked to Keiran about his early career journey, getting into blogging, and how he got into Tech Field Day. And this part of the interview gets off to a rocket start, John. Was I the only one impressed by that?
Yeah, he really catches me on the jaw straight out of the gate. Let's get to working on career advancement with Keiran Shelden. Keiran, welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast.
John, Nick, thanks for having me. If one thing I've learnt from the John White School of Mentoring is that for my first time, this is going to be bad. Let's hope it's not going to be.
That's one of the core principles of the John White School of Mentoring. You know what? And if you're out there and you want to join the John White School of Mentoring, send that tweet out to @NerdJourney for pricing and packaging today, and we'll get you hooked up just like Keiran. What a way to start the show. Great job, man.
All right, been holding on to that for the last couple of weeks.
All right, we're back after 3 minutes of me not being able to say anything. Thanks a lot for joining us. One of the things I wanted to do before we get into the specific, incident that you talked about in your blog was talking to you about kind of your vision of your IT career journey so far. Can you talk about where you got started?
Yeah, so I guess going way back to when I was about 9 or 10, I started playing with computers. They were sort of just there at home and did a little bit here and there. And then I sort of started doing a bit more at school. There was a tech team and I joined that where I started to do a bit more going around the classrooms. And if a mouse wasn't working properly or something like that, go and replace it. Little jobs here, but it was sort of to build up that progression. Once I got into high school, I was sort of hanging around with all the computer nerds, and we from that point when I got into about the age of 15, I ended up going on to a school-based traineeship where I would do what would be a college degree, certificate, and that certificate I had to go and do a workplace on site for 2 years. So over that time, I spent a lot of time working in a school doing the IT across it. So not only doing bits and pieces of fixing those computers and that, but also learning about how Active Directory worked, how switching and routing worked, and going sort of through that process. And then from there, just quickly, I went into.
Can I ask you a quick question about that? Is that something that is typical of the education system in Australia? That kind of certificate and then work placement?
So it's an optional extracurricular type of activity that you can do. So we can go through normal schooling and go into university if we want to, but then there is an alternative option where you could also do the school-based traineeship, where as part you take a day out of your schooling. You still have the responsibility of catching up on that schooling, but during that time, you take that day off and you go and work in the work environment. So if you want to do hospitality, you might be actually working in find yourself working in a restaurant or something like that for a day if you want to learn how to be a chef, and that's this traineeship that you're doing. So that's what I did, but I did it in IT, and so there was a local school nearby that took that on, and you get paid for that time as well. So it actually becomes a kind of like a part-time job at the same time. So while you're still learning and doing your certificate.
Wow, thanks. Thanks for that clarification. That's sounds like something that is. I mean, we don't have that in the States, I think, in a formalized way. So, thanks for clarifying that. Sorry to interrupt you. What was the next step?
Yeah, so I did that, and then as soon as I finished school, I actually went into a full-time um, career working in a computer store and just selling computer components. And I did that for 6 months, and from that point, I actually had a couple of interviews from people who had come into the store. I knew some people that worked with these companies, and they had actually sent their boss in and said recommended me to come and work for him. A few of those didn't sort of work out, and then one day I had another school, a IT manager from that school come in, and he actually gave me an interview on the spot at my desk, which was a bit interesting. And but luckily that day my manager wasn't actually there, so I got away with that. But he started just asking some general questions and stuff while he was in to pick up some products. So I did that, and I ended up going into a high school where I was just in charge of IT. I actually had to take the reins and go through that process of having people come in and say, "This is the issue. This isn't working. Why isn't this working?" And I had to take that sort of full force. Whereas back in my traineeship, I didn't have to take that on. So it was kind of a really big sort of step forward in those responsibilities. But interesting enough, when I went into the school, they were actually running Novell, which I had never touched before. So it was a bit of another learning curve in a technology-wise sort of thing. So I got my feet wet in Novell, which introduced me to some other technologies. Like I hadn't used Linux in the past or anything like that. So it was all Windows-based for me, and so I decided that I started to pick up a few skills there. And then after about 6 months, that school was forced by the education department to move on to what they created a one network where all the schools were connected and not their own separate business unit. And in that, we moved to Windows-based, but things became more locked down. So, but the benefit of having this was that I could move to a different school and things would be very similar to set up. So it didn't take too much to the several schools that I moved to be able to do that. But each school that I moved to over a couple of years were very similar. And I moved to some primary schools where there was less work to do. High schools had a lot of breakages in that. Kids were malicious with the devices as teenagers are or can be. And then there was the primary schools where just there wasn't much to do. So I found myself walk in 3 jobs done in half an hour, and I spent a day just sitting there, kind of thing. If someone needed me, and then at that point, I was not earning a lot of money for those first few places I was working, and so I went out and said to our community that we had a IT emailing list. with all the schools, and I just said I'm looking for someone to fill my position here. If anyone's looking for that, that's fine. And I went out and started searching to go into the private industry, move away from education. And I actually got a call up from another school who was the second biggest in Brisbane, a high school. And this is where it really opened up for me, where my IT career, where I started learning more about things like certifications and that. And the school contacted me and said, "We want you to come in for an interview. We've seen the stuff that you've been sending over the emailing list and that." And so we did that. And and I went in for an interview, and they were really happy to have me. So from that point, I started at the school, and what really took me by surprise was they actually were virtualized. And this was sort of going against the department rules. And this is where I started getting my feet wet in virtualization. But I started hearing about certifications and that. One of the tech guys I was working with in a team of 3 said, you should go out and we're doing something like CCNAs or MCITP. And from that point, I actually went, all right, I've been using Microsoft products for quite some time now. And I went ahead and tried to go for my MCITP. This is where I first learned about my ego. It was my MCITP. I failed the exam twice, and I kind of went in with guns blazing. I studied hard, but at the same time, I just went, oh yeah, I know exactly what's happening. I didn't review, and it sort of started shaping the way that I saw myself in what I did in my work as well. That I never really went through a reviewing process. So, but I went through that certification, and I kind of gave up after the second one. I sort of sat at that. But because the school was virtualized, this is where I started learning about VMware products, and I moved into that side of things, and I started getting involved in the community a bit more within the school, and from there, VMware sort of grew on me, and then I was in this place for 2.5 years, and in that time, when I started to realize that where I wanted to go into the VMware side of things is that's what I used as my search term, looking for this new job that I wanted to get out of schools and be able to do. It's just VMware, and I had a few job interviews, and they all turned me away because I was just focused on VMware. That's all I wanted to be doing. I wanted to get into building hosts and that, and I then found that. With one job role I went for, I actually managed to get 2 interviews. I did the first interview with the CEO, and he asked me to do some whiteboarding, and he had a little quiz to do as well about to find out all this sort of different technology in that. And when I did the whiteboarding, it was on DNS and how DNS worked. Funnily enough, when I explained it, I actually explained it in the reverse of how DNS works and how the lookups work in that. And so he explained that to me, that you had the right concept, and it was just the opposite of how it actually works. And so I actually found this guy to be really good because I asked for feedback at the end of the interview, of the second interview, and he basically said, "We found you were too focused on VMware. There's heaps of virtualization products out there. You need to expand. You need to look into these other products." And he listed off a few of where the trends are and what to start looking into. And I thought that CEO, I sort of owe part of my career to the direction it's gone, just from having that feedback. And it was actually the first time I ever asked for feedback as well from an interview. And if anyone else is going through an interview process, I highly recommend asking for that feedback because it becomes invaluable. It's that reflection that you need to try and shape, and that's what I find that that process is just it is a way to reflect and be able to know where you need to guide yourself or give you that clarity on what is out there, what the industry is like. So, and not long after that, about a week later, I had this interview for my current role where I'm a cloud systems engineer, and they took a chance on me because it was the same thing. I actually had the interview before I had feedback, and it was still VMware stuff, but they actually were using some technology that we were using back in the school. So there was like Fortinet and Cisco. So we were able to sort of meet on common ground there, and they took a chance. And I've been there for almost 5 years now, and in that process, it has I have a clearer view of exactly what I want to be doing, but I also ended up touching on a day-to-day basis is I'm touching Microsoft servers, I'm touching Juniper, Fortinet, Citrix, like the whole business. I touch every single part of it, and I wouldn't have had that exposure until I went sort of got that feedback and went into a company that went, no, you can't just be doing VMware.
That's a really interesting observation that you were interested in a specific technology, in this case, VMware, and you needed people to guide you towards the idea that you can be interested in one thing, but you have to be able to speak to and maybe touch the adjacent technologies. For example, if it's infrastructure virtualization, that's touching networking and a variety of different networking products from, core networking to firewalling. And storage, and maybe file storage, maybe block storage, and do a bunch of different types of things in order for people to go, oh yeah, that's somebody that we want on the team, or they think that you can be guided towards that. That's a really interesting observation.
Mm.
It's lucky, like I know that I've been guided towards that as well.
What I thought was really interesting is that you got the feedback even though you were told no. And uh, that may be a little uncommon these days. I'm not sure that people who turn someone else down want to give feedback because it's difficult enough to tell someone no. But I think that most people probably want to know why, and I think it's great that that particular CEO was willing to take you aside and say, "Hey, here's what you need to do, and here's how you can get better," because they cared about you as a fellow human being. I love it.
And that CEO, I actually felt, and I haven't forgotten him over those 5 years, that if I was looking for another position again, and I still wanted to stay within the same concept of what that business does, I would actually go back to him and ask him and say, "This is what I've done. I've taken on your advice. I've done this. I want to actually work for you." Because how I see it with you is that you want people to grow. You are focusing on that. And I want you to be my CEO for that reason. So he sort of is doing himself a favor as well, the way I saw that it sort of, he, he sent me away to improve myself to come back as well, if that is what his intention was. So I'm really pleased that he had sort of done that, and I saw that side of him.
That's fascinating for you to comment on that, because that's something that it kind of triggers for me this idea that if he's that focused on giving people feedback and helping people to develop, for people that he's not hiring, then how focused on that is he for people that he is hiring? That am I right in restating that way?
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't just the feedback he gave after the interview. It was the feedback he also gave during the first interview with, like where I said he spoke about DNS. When I whiteboarded it wrong, he actually took me through it again to reiterate it. And this was when I was actually doing my this particular one was after I'd done all my Microsoft certs and that as well. And so I had actually studied DNS, but in that situation where I was whiteboarding, I just, my mind flipped the whole thing around and I explained it incorrectly. Um, but from there, it also then said to me, well, I need to improve my whiteboarding. How do I focus when I'm in front of a customer when I'm doing that as well? And so his feedback was able to, during that process, was, yeah, it covered things like in your whiteboarding here, you need to slow down, you need to think about this, you need to do that as well. So it wasn't just, it just wasn't that feedback after the interview.
I think that speaks very well to the idea for everyone listening, whatever position you're in, interviewer, interviewee, there are teachable moments in every type of human interaction, regardless of the setting, regardless of whether we think it's a faux pas or not. It's never a bad idea to help someone learn something or give them feedback so that they can do better next time, no matter what. I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I I actually want to go back to something that you said. It sounds like there's another lesson that you learned, or at least you mentioned, and maybe so long ago it feels like something that at least you've internalized, and that is that you at least got one job by um, by dint of almost like social networking, right? But on an internal email list by explaining things that you had done and talking about projects that you had done and broadcasting out to a larger audience. And in doing so, is that something that triggered your blogging in the future? This idea that, oh, if I put out some of the things that I've been talking about, that might open me up to new opportunities.
Yeah, so with the blogging, that I had actually been thinking, this was just before I started looking into the virtualization stuff that we had at the school. I was actually quite heavily into working with Apple Macs. That was why the school particularly hired me, because I had expertise in working with Mac OS and that, and they had no one. Um, and at that point in time, I actually had been thinking about, well, what if I started doing some tutorials and stuff on Mac and um, creating this blog about it, and that never happened. But I still had that in my mind that I wanted to get into that, and I'd met a few people through techexams.net, which I found when I was doing my Microsoft certification, and they started to encourage me to say, build up a blog, start getting your name out there, just write things up. And so I did create my blog, and I didn't know what to put up there, so I started just doing basic things like different sorts of RAID and building a little home lab and basic things. But it then started to grow, and it actually started to slow down as well at the same time. When I started, I was every Friday night I'd be churning out a new blog, and then the next year it sort of rolled over, and then it just started slowing down. I've had times where I've had 2 or 3 months without a blog post, but the blogs now that I'm writing, I try to focus on some form of education or talk about just this new product has come out. The other ones are things from Tech Field Day as well, and that sort of picked up last year where I did a few Tech Field Day events. So yeah, it's sort of without the blogging, I wouldn't have got into Tech Field Day. But the other thing is, in a career sense, that same interview that I had with this CEO who gave this feedback was that he said he one of his first questions was about a blog post I had written about starting to get into the EUC process and that. So I started writing a couple of a small series because I was looking at rolling out end user computing at the school. And so I went, well, what if I created a blog series on this and I start to understand it better, and break it down for myself? And then I went into this interview by the second or third post, and one of his first questions was about that post and about how do I understand it? What are the pain points I'm finding at this stage? And that, so yeah, it sort of had opened up that little bit into a career thing, but yeah, at the moment it sort of just sits there as well. Just whatever I find to write about. At the moment, I've written a couple of things around rubric because I'm interested in that technology now as well, and this is me spreading my wings into newer technologies and that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That can you maybe talk about that experience of being, I don't know if it was a self nomination or if somebody recommended you, or what that was like to get to be a Tech Field Day delegate that first time.
Yeah, so with Tech Field Day, it was a bit interesting. So I've got a couple. There's a couple of people here in Brisbane that are Tech Field Day delegates, and one of them's a good friend, Dan Frith, and he recommended me to sign up for Tech Field Day. But then he also put a recommendation into Tech Field Day to also take me on. So they called me over for Storage Field Day last year in Boston, and it was quite an experience because it was my first time overseas. It was the first time I did some blogging that I was at an event for. So I am there to write a blog about. It's not mandatory, but the idea behind is that you are getting your opinion out about these products that these companies are paying for the time to be able to present, and get their feedback for. So it was, yeah, it was it was a really interesting experience. And the first time I haven't done so well. The second time I went over, I haven't written any blogs. I've written them, I've deleted them, rewrote them, but I just haven't posted any. And that sort of, you get into that with blogging. You write these posts and then you go, is that really what I wanted to say, or how's it going to take, and that. But with Tech Field Day, it's opened it up for other. I've got a much larger following now with the community, and yeah, for me, I hope that opens up career opportunities for me as well, being able to get that exposure with my blogs, but also I am spending more time now and actually writing my blogs and reviewing my blogs and making sure that they're at a presentable version.
Now, when you're doing something like blogging for Tech Field Day, I mean, in a way, it's kind of work. So, is it still fun, given the fact that you have to do it and it wasn't necessarily a subject you chose in this case?
Yeah, it is actually quite a fun experience. And the thing is, it's not all about the blogging because the event is live streamed. So you are interacting with those companies on the spot, and you are asking questions about why is it set up this way, or wouldn't it work better if it was done this way? And it depends how you want to deliver your content. So whether you got your questions and deliver them to them on the spot, or you just want to go and write that blog after being there. But I don't think it has taken away the fun aspect. Stephen Foskett does a brilliant job of making it a fun environment. He takes you to these events, but then the people that you meet and the going out to dinner afterwards and the experiences that they provide on Tech Field Day, it just makes it a really fun event, and you just want to go back again and do it again. And when I get home, I feel I have this little bit of an obligation that I need to write something, present something to show that their time sending me over wasn't wasted and that I am providing back something. But it means that I get to go again next time and having another enjoyable experience. And yeah, so it's sort of it's I consider it something that's quite fun to do, and I will continue to do it as long as I can.
Nick, I just can't get over the constructive feedback that Keiran got. That was super generous of that hiring manager. I've only ever gotten two pieces of feedback that stick out in my mind. The first was a manager who told me that vMotion was absolutely possible from AMD to Intel and back, which is just not true. And then another manager who told me that a 25-to-1 consolidation ratio was ridiculous. I wasn't offered either of those positions, but that might have been for the best. Have you ever gotten feedback from an interview which didn't lead to a job offer?
When I think about it, no, I don't think I have. And that's not to be narcissistic. I just don't believe I have. I feel like it's pretty atypical to get the kind of feedback Keiran did, especially when he was not put forward in the hiring process past that point. But I think there definitely are cases where someone can't hire you, but they see something in you that they want to improve and they can't help but give you a little bit of encouragement.
Yeah, I can totally agree with that. It was pretty atypical, but I can definitely understand the feeling the need to offer constructive feedback to somebody that you think might help, especially if a big part of your identity and job is mentoring other people. It's interesting that he got it. Well, anything pop into your mind before we break? I'm looking forward to next week when we actually get into the article on burnout.
Nope. Just a reminder that we want people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We want to know if we're being helpful and are always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter at Nerd Journey.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at VJourneyman for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_. Signing off.
Adios.